We will create our own proofing oven here in our BYU lab. You need to decide where you're going to do that. The proofing oven is a warm, moist environment, and you need to have heat and some kind of moisture. You need to look and decide whether you're going to use your upper oven or your lower oven. Decide by looking for the fan. The fan is your convection oven, and you may need that for baking, so use the other oven for the proofing oven. I have 2 cups of water that I put in the microwave, and I set it for 3 minutes so it got really hot. And then I'm going to pour it into the 8x8 aluminum baking pan, and I'll put that on the floor of the oven. The reason that I put it on the floor of the oven is so that I can replace the rack. If it calls for the dough to rise, I can put it on the rack, or if it's the final product shaped into either pretzels or cinnamon rolls, I can put that on the rack and allow that to rise. We are going to go ahead now with the white bread. When you're adding flour to the dough, you need to remember that it's always easier to add more flour to a too soft dough than water to a too stiff dough. I've already started to mix this dough. When you're measuring the flour, make sure that you spoon in and level off with all of your flour measurements. It's kind of helpful if you use cold water to clean the sticky dough off of the things that it's stuck to. So just use a rubber scraper and scrape all of that off under cold water, and it makes the whole process a lot easier. Also, when you're cleaning up the extra flour, if you'll use the bench scraper and just scrape that extra flour right into the garbage can, rather than using the towels, we don't end up with paste in the washing machine. So this is a pretty good white bread dough. It's very soft. It is a little bit sticky, so I could add just a little bit more flour to that. Make sure when you're setting up the mixer that you click it down in back so that it's set up properly. And to add the flour, what you're going to do is just add a tiny bit at a time by tapping on the edge of the bowl. You should just be able to gather that up. And it is quite soft, and notice that it does stick to my fingers, but if I touch it quickly, it does not stick. And that's ready to shape into the loaves. When you're rolling out the white bread, there's a few ways to do it. You can do a rolling pin and just roll it the length of your bread pan, and then just roll it up like you would sweet rolls. You just roll that up, tuck the ends under. And I've already pre-greased these pans. Remember, with bread pans and cake pans, you need to use shortening on bread pans and cake pans. So I've liberally greased this with shortening. That means that you can see that shortening in the pan. I'm sealing the roll now by pinching this together. This is the bottom part. And then I'll just lift this up into the bread pan, grease the top by pressing it on the greased pan, turn it over, and I've got that bread ready to place in the proofing oven. When you're making the raspberry butter, you want to whip the butter until it's super light and fluffy before you add the raspberries. It should look like this. Notice how that's super light and fluffy? In the recipe, it calls for softened butter. If you get the butter right out of the refrigerator and it's rock hard, if you can press on it with your finger and it makes an indentation, that is soft enough. But if it's rock hard, you may put it in the microwave for 5 seconds, no longer. The secret of making the raspberry butter is to add the raspberries one at a time. Basically, you're incorporating a liquid into a fat, so you have to do it very slowly. Make sure those raspberries are thawed, and this is what your raspberry butter will look like that goes with the white bread. This is the cinnamon roll that I've rolled out to an 18 by 24 inch rectangle. What I'm going to do now is spread it with melted butter, and I like to keep dishes to a minimal, so I use the bottom of the measuring cup to spread that butter around. We're going to then sprinkle it with cinnamon sugar, and you will cover half of the surface with nuts and raisins and half of the surface with walnuts. The reason we do that is there are some people who don't like walnuts and raisins, and so we give half of it just plain. I blame the LDS Church for people not liking raisins, because what happens when you are 18 months old? They stick you in the nursery and you eat raisins until you're 3. So maybe that's why. People don't seem to dislike goldfish, however. So there's all of the cinnamon sugar on there. You can go ahead and use a spoon to spread that out. You're going to put raisins on half of the surface. And you're going to put chopped nuts on half of the surface. Then we'll roll this up. And as you roll it up, you want to make sure that you keep a tight roll. If you don't keep it tight, then the cinnamon rolls will come apart as you bake it and let that rise. And as you roll it, you want to lift and stretch. So I'm stretching and lifting so that it's a nice tight roll. Then I'm going to use dental floss to do the cutting. And the reason that we use dental floss is so that it doesn't crush the roll that I've made. This dough has been proofed in the oven, and so it's nice and fluffy. And at the end, when you get to about here, you're going to lift and stretch and pinch to seal that all the way along the length of the roll. Then we'll take the dental floss and we'll cut it into 24 segments, and all 24 sweet rolls will fit on your jelly roll pan that you've lined with parchment paper. Now sometimes when you get it to this point, you'll have a skinny part and a fat part. What you need to do at this point is push and stretch so that you get a uniform log all the way along there, and that makes the cinnamon rolls all the same diameter. So now we'll get some dental floss. And what you do is just put it underneath the end, bring it up, cross the dental floss, and you have a cinnamon roll. Do the same thing all the way along until you have 24 cinnamon rolls. We'll go ahead and place those on the jelly roll pan that is lined with parchment paper. You'll put them 4 across and 6 down. They all will fit. Then you put them in the proofing oven, and then we'll bake them. When you're cutting the pretzels into sections, use the bench knife or the dough knife, or sometimes it's called the bench scraper, to divide the dough. And you're just going to press down and then divide it into sections so that you can form that into your pretzels. I've already divided these. They'll look about like this. Now when you're rolling it into pretzels, if you will allow it some time to rest in between rolling, then it makes it a lot easier. So you roll from the center out with each of the sections, roll from the center out, and do each ball and let it rest, and then do the next ball. You'll find that as you begin, they want to stretch back into the shape, and if you allow it a little bit of time, then it will be easier to work with. See, I'm struggling with this a little bit because it hadn't been rolled. See the difference in length? So when you get them all to about the same length, then you're going to form them into pretzel shapes, and you'll have a diagram that is on your microwave oven door to help you. But basically, you bring it up, cross it, and then cross it again, bring it to here, and pinch, and you've got your pretzel. With the honey butter, you want to make sure that you end up with a light and fluffy finished product. I'm going to go ahead and mix this. This is what it looks like when it's light and fluffy. It has a lot of air in it, and then we'll just go ahead and add the honey gradually. Remember, when you measure honey or molasses or corn syrup or anything that's sticky, if you grease the measuring cup, it will slide out a lot easier. The trick with adding this is just adding it very gradually so that it incorporates in with the butter. Here's the finished honey butter. It should look like this, light and fluffy. The whole wheat batter bread is a super, super sticky dough. And this is just about what it should look like. Super sticky. I wouldn't want to get my hands in there to work with that at all. See how sticky that is? Do half in each pan. And then what you will do to level out the pans, if it needs to level out and look nice, you can wet your hands and press that in. Remember to use your rubber scraper to get most of the dough out so that your cleanup is easier. When you make the pasta dough, this is an example of a very, very stiff dough. And the reason that you want a stiff dough with the pasta dough is so that it does not stick to the pasta roller as you try to feed it through. I've divided the pasta into 8 sections. Then I'm just going to flatten them out to within about 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to use the attachments to the KitchenAid pasta maker. This is the attachment that is the rollers. The first time you put it through, you want to have it at its widest setting. That's a number 1. You open up the front of your KitchenAid mixer, make sure that this screw is all the way out, and then if you look at the end of this, this is square, and you can see if you look down in there, there's a square that you need to line it up with. So you get it in, and then there's a peg on this side that it has to fit in where that peg is. Then you secure it with the screw. Then all you have to do once you've patted these out is to feed them through one at a time. Feeding them through one at a time allows the gluten to relax in each one. Then you're going to set it to a closer setting, which would be a 2 now, and you would feed them through in the order that you just put them through before, and this makes it thinner. The last setting is a number 3. You don't want to go any narrower than a 3. And then we'll put the noodle cutter on. So I'll do 1. Make sure you allow them to rest and do all of them the way that I've just explained. If they get sticky at all, add a little bit more flour on top and on bottom, and then they're safe to feed through. I'm going to take this attachment off now, and I'll put on the noodle cutter. We use the wide noodle cutter attachment. We don't use the spaghetti one. We just use the wide noodle cutter attachment. Put it on the same way you did the roller. Put the square inside the square. Put the post in where the post fits. And make sure that that screw secures it. Then I just feed it through, and it makes the noodles. I'll take these noodles and I'll put them on a towel that I've draped over a cupboard door. And there's all your noodles. You'll separate them as you put them on the towel that you've draped over the cupboard door. They only need to dry long enough so that they don't stick together as you transfer them from where you're drying them to the pot. And in the pot, you're going to use the stock pot with the pasta basket, and make sure that you allow plenty of time for that stock pot water to come to boil, because there's a lot of water. Sometimes that takes up to 30 minutes. When you're finished using the pasta maker, you need to remember to never ever immerse the parts in water. What you'll need to do is take a little brush and just brush all of the flour, any dough particles, you just brush this off, but because there are steel parts on the inside that will rust, you want to never ever immerse these in water.